we're going to do the story of Noah. So if you look in the Bible, you'll find the story of Noah in Genesis and chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. It is a long story in the Bible. So what I've done, I hope not unfairly, is I've tried to shorten that down a bit, produce one of my abridged versions. So I'm still using text from the Bible, and particularly from the Bible translation that we use here at Albert Road, called the New Living Translation. It's quite easy to follow, and it will just help us. Because what we're going to do is we're going to tell that story, and it's going to mean that we can join in with the story, take part in that, and have some fun, I hope, together as well as we do so. So, this is what Genesis says. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked closely with God. Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now God saw that the earth had become filled with violence, and that everything human beings thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he ever made them. It broke his heart. But Noah found favour with the Lord. So I was thinking the first thing we need is a Noah. Who wants to be our Noah? Not you, you've got cat ears on. You belong in the ark. Who wants to be our Noah? Oh, Jonathan's got his hand up. He's tried to point at somebody else. Come on, Jonathan, come we know. That would be brilliant. You're like a good Noah. All right, you can stand on the top step there and everyone can see you. Give them all the wave and say, hello, Noah. Now, God said to Noah, I've decided to destroy all human life. But here's what I want you to do. Build a large boat from wood and waterproof it with tar inside and out. Then construct decks and stalls throughout its interior. Make the boats 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Can you do that, Noah? You can. Brilliant. Next time knows how to build a boat on wood that's 450 feet long. Leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around, put the door on the side, and build 3 decks inside the boat. Lower, middle, and upper. All right, so Noah, you need to build a boat. Have you got a boat? No. Has anyone brought a boat with them today? Oh, hang on. Ian's waving. Ian, have you brought a boat with you? Have you got it? Is it just there? Do you want to show us? It's there. It says boat on it. Well, that'd be a giveaway, wouldn't it? Right. Okay. I bet Shannon understood. Let's see what we can do with this. Where's the egg? Is it this egg right here? It does look like an egg, doesn't it? We do need to blow it up. Are you ready to puff? Oh, it's down here. It's down here. I'll turn it around. So here's our boat. Needs some air in it, doesn't it? Now, is that switch on the wall? Can you just pop that switch on the wall? Right there. That's not right. Do that instead. All right, so Ian's going to keep filling up our boat there at the moment. Noah, you're also going to need a clipboard. So let's just grab your clipboard here. Grab your clipboard. And well, you're going to need this as well. Now then. God said to Noah, can you hear me okay? God said to Noah, bring a pair of every animal, a male and a female, into the boat. And every kind, dropped a line. Into the boat with you to keep them alive. Pairs of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground. They're going to come to you to be kept alive. There must be a male and female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. Have you got that? Enough food for you and your family and all the animals. You don't know how many animals there are? Well, how many animals have you got on your list? 15 animals. That's a lot of animals. Have you got another bit to fill up there? There's another frame point here. Oh, 3, 4. Oh dear. Right, so there's I'll let you sort out the boat. Well, we are going to need to get all the animals, but you notice what it said? It said that the animals will come to you to be kept alive. So we need to find some animals for our ark. Why don't you guys have a look under your seats, have a feel, see what you can find. Not this time. If you've got an animal under your seats, just give it a little wave in the air. Yes, that's spectacular. Great. Brilliant. Fantastic. So here's what we're going to do.
They're all going to come to you.
Nowhere here is going to call out an animal. And then what we need to do is, if you've got that, hold it up high in the air. Okay? There's pairs of animals, okay? So when you pull out your animal, you hold it up, you meet with your other pair, go on in your pair, and you come together, and you put it in the boat. Alright? Does that sound good? Yeah? So we find the animals, you call them out, those two animals meet and come and put them in the boat. Alright? So go.
Lions. A crow.
Lions, that was lions. Oh, there's one. There's one lion. There's another lion. Brilliant. Come together, lions. And lions in the boat. Brilliant. Fantastic.
Bears.
Bears. Oh, we've got lots of bears. Look, we've got 2 species of bears. Euro bears and brown bears. That's a spotted husky. Only ever seen one point in the year. What's next? Rhinos. Have we got rhinos?
Yeah.
There's a rhino. Yes, we've got another rhino. Oh, Rosie's got a rhino there. George's going to Rosie's rhino. Brilliant. So George and your rhino. Yeah, you better put it on the end, right? Giraffes. Giraffes, come on, giraffes, come and meet in the middle. Put your giraffe into the boat. Brilliant. We've got 3 giraffes. Oh, right. Phil said you only had 1.
Sorry.
But they had a baby on the way. Keep going. Parrots. Parrots, who's got parrots? Yes. I don't know what that one is. Lady, yeah, I've got a skill. Is that a parrot as well? Brilliant. We're going to have those throws then. Let's have the purple throw and the black throw. Nice smashing. Thank you. There we go.
There you go.
Lovely.
2 by 2.
2 by 2. Right, what's next? Keep going.
Lizards.
Lizards. Yes, we've got 2 lizards there. What's next?
Monkey.
Monkeys. We've got monkeys. Sorry, it's grade 8. Sorry, I've got 8. That's what they are, because you're right. I haven't got any tails today. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, look at this boat. This is splendid. Ian, that's awesome. Really, really great. Brilliant. Look at that. Who'd have thought we'd have a Noah's Ark when we're actually doing the story? Brilliant. What's next?
Penguins.
Penguins. Penguins. Yes. Try Aaron Tiana, got our penguins. Brilliant. In they go together into the ark. Lovely. Great. What's next?
Pandas.
Pandas. Let's get some pandas in the ark. Brilliant. Pandas. In they go.
Reindeer.
Reindeer. The family and Helen. We've got our reindeers.
It's Rudolph and one of his friends. Rudolph and his wife.
Oh, it must be Donna in that case. No.
No. Yeah, it's Rudolph. No,
What's next?
Tigers.
Tigers. 2 tigers. That is a cat. What else have we got? What's next?
Dogs.
Dogs. Yes, hard dogs. From it on the ark. Brilliant. What's next? Cats. Ah, yes. Cats. Yes, Hello Kitty. Both in dresses. Both our cats wearing dresses. Perfect. Thank you, dog. That's smashing. Oh, we've got extra cats. Yes, yes. Cats in dresses and cats in stripes. Wonderful. Thank you. What's next?
Cows.
Cows.
Dinosaurs. Hold on. We can't find the other cat.
There's got to be another cow somewhere. Anyone got a cow? It was a tiny cow. Okay. Well, I've got another, yeah. Quite hard to look at the other one. Go on, Mrs. Noah, put her in the ark. Great. What's the next one on your list?
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. No idea if there are dinosaurs on the ark. It's got 2 meshes, so in they can go. We've got what's Tasha John? Ducks. Ducks. Brilliant. Rose again, brilliant. Thanks, George.
This list doesn't have one of the most important. Sheep.
Sheep. Sheep. We've got sheep. We've got 1 sheep. We've got another sheep. No, yes, we've got 2 sheep. Brilliant. Thank you, sheep. Another bird. A blue bird. Okay. It must have snuck on its own. Okay. Brilliant. Well done, Noah. Our boat is full of animals. I don't know if you can see this. I'm just going to try and drag it. There we go. So our ark is full of animals. Very good. Good. I think that's about it. Noah did everything exactly as the Lord commanded him. So well done, Noah. When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, go into the boat with all your family. You better get in the boat. Not your family. We'll just pretend you've got family. Okay, Mrs. Noah, come on. Yeah. You can be Mrs. Noah. Shoes off. Shoes off. What was Noah's wife's name? You all know this joke. Joe in the bar. Noah, I've got your footballs here. Here you go.
What was the name?
Joe in the bar. So God says, 7 days from now, I'll make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights. I've wiped from the earth all the living things I've created. And the Lord closed the door behind him. Noah was 600 years old. You're looking good there, Noah, for 600. How do you feel? Feel all right? Yeah, good. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. All the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. So we're going to need some sound effects. So what should we do? Pitter patter. So it's raining. It's raining. It's still raining. It rains for 40 days. All right. And the flood waters grew deeper and deeper. So maybe we should all stand up very slowly. So it's getting deeper and deeper. That's brilliant. It was covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. Phil shaking his head at that. It doesn't want to do that. I was thinking if the kids weren't getting to lift the boat, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, people sat down. The waters haven't gone down yet. There is higher and higher off the ground. Lifting the boat high off the earth, the boat floated safely on the surface until the water even covered the highest mountains on earth. Everything that lived and breathed on dry land, birds and animals, big and small, farm and wild, and all the people died. The only ones who survived were Noah and the ones with him in the boat. Animals. The floodwaters covered the earth for 150 days. But God remembered Noah and all those with him in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the earth. Sounds like it's time for more sound effects. And the floodwaters began to recede. Sit down. Exactly 5 months after the flood began, the boat came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to go down, other mountain peaks became visible. After another 40 days, Noah opened the window he'd made in the boat and released a raven. We're going to need a raven. Who's going to be our raven?
Finn.
Finn, you can be our raven. Oh, brilliant. You're even wearing black already. That's perfect. Let's do your chest up. So you look at that. The boat's not holding it. No. Oh, it's up here. Here goes and Finn. Right, so. And do you know what the raven did? The raven flew back and forth. Flew back and forth. Noah also released a dove. You need a dove. Who's going to be our dove? Hannah, you're going to be our dove. Brilliant. Who's going to be our dove? So, here you go. You can put this on as be our dove. All right. Here you go. And you can. You can carefully, avoiding the furniture, run around the church. That's okay. So God also released a dove to see if it could find dry ground. but the dove could find no place to land.
No.
So Noah held out his hand and drew the dove back into the boat.
No, how about
You coming in the boat?
get in the boat? Get in the boat.
Yeah, doves don't wear shoes.
What about the raven? Well, yeah, raven.
After waiting another 7 days, Noah released the dove again. Now you get dove. Okay, something. All right. And this time the dove returned to him in the evening with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. So you're going to need to find a leaf and just pop it into your lips.
Yeah.
Can you pull one off?
Cheese.
Sleeves are getting in the way, aren't they? Yay! Brilliant! Well done. Fantastic. Oscar for that acting.
Well done.
Tremendous. And Noah knew the floodwaters were almost gone. So he waited another 7 days and then released the dove again.
7 days later.
And this time it didn't come back. And the raven, I don't think could come back either. So you guys can have a seat again. But thank you very much. Noah was now 601 years old.
Oh, wow. What then?
On the first day of the new year, 10.5 months after the flood began, Noah lifted back the covering of the boat and saw the surface of the ground was dry. 2 more months went by, and at last the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, leave the boat, all of you, yes, fall out the side, you and your wife, and your sons, and their wives. Release all the animals, release the animals! Release the animals! You're going to tip them out, are you? I think they just throw them out. Mrs. Noah.
Release! Yeah. Oh, no, my cows are going to be stinks now.
Release all the animals so they can be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth. So Noah, his sons, and his wife, and their wives left the boat. And all of the large and small animals came out of the boat pair by pair. We come out of the boat. Well done. Now Noah. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and there he sacrificed as burnt offerings some of the animals and birds. Don't worry, we're not going to set fire to any toys. The Lord was pleased with the aroma and said to himself, I will never again curse the grounds because of the human race, even though everything they think or imagine is bent towards evil, even from childhood. I'll never again destroy all living things. As long as the earth remains, there'll be planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. Then God blessed Noah and his sons and told them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. If anyone takes a human life, that person's life will also be taken by human hands. For God made human beings in his own image. But I hereby confirm my covenant with you and your descendants, and with every living creature on the earth. Never again will floodwaters kill all living creatures. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. As a sign of my covenant, for all generations to come, I've placed my rainbow in the clouds. We'll have to, because I've forgotten to prepare it. So you just have to imagine it. Just have to imagine it. When the rainbow appears, I will remember my covenant. Never again will the floodwaters destroy all life on earth. That's brilliant. Well done, everybody. So we're going to have a big clap for our actors.
Should we just say a very brief word of prayer before I start? Father God, I thank you for this harvest service. I thank you for this opportunity to look at your words. And Father God, I pray that you would use it, use the words of my mouth to communicate your love to all of us, Lord. Soften our hearts so that we will be able to hear you and what you have to say in your name. Amen. So, why look at the story of Noah? I mean, have I found archaeological evidence? I was going to say no, but actually, no. No, of course, no, I haven't found the ark. I'm sorry to disappoint you, and of course, neither has anybody else. Is there genealogical evidence that I find that? No, I haven't really got that either. No, the reason we're going to look at the story of Noah this morning is simply because it's in the Bible. And we believe that the Bible is God's self-revelation of himself. It's God telling us who he is. And as a podcast I listen to says, it's sort of strapline is it's a unified story that leads to Jesus. And there's plenty of evidence for Jesus. So yeah, no, I haven't found any of the things that I've talked about, archaeological evidence or geological evidence, but I do see that this story points to Jesus. I also see that there's plenty of evidence for violence. You see this, the world described in the story of Noah is a world that's actually not that too dissimilar for our own. And this story maybe just tells us what God thinks about that. We, of course, live in quite different times from Noah. But maybe it can help us live in an unjust and often violent world. Maybe it gives us some answers. Can't tell you exactly when all of this happened. I can't answer all the questions you have about logistics. You know, how do they feed that many animals every day? You know, how do they stop the lions eating the doves or whatever? I don't know. But what I do see that we have just enough details to answer the question about what is God like. You see, because if you're here this morning, I'm guessing that you've kind of come to the conclusion that maybe God exists, or you believe that God exists. And if you've got that far, then really we want to know what God is like. So the first thing I want to say about God is that he isn't distant, but deeply involved in his creation. God didn't just sort of start everything rolling and then just sort of step away. No, he's really involved in what's going on because he created his creation to display his glory. And at the start of the book of Genesis, God looks at what he's created and he says it is good. And finally, on day 6, after creating humans, he says it is very good. In the garden, he walked with Adam and Eve, but they turned from him and went their own way. By the time of Noah, the results of that decision are catastrophic. One of the arguments for God is the fine-tuning of the universe. The argument goes that all the constants of the universe, and gravity and all the rest of it, are so finely tuned for life to exist that someone, i.e. God, must have set the numbers. The idea that it all happened by chance is unlikely. It's not a bad argument, but this story tells us that just like the physical universe, the moral laws are also finely balanced. As God looked at his creation, in particular the humans he created, to bear his image, all he saw was violence. A violence that filled the earth. We're not talking about the odd scuffle on a Friday night outside the pub. We're talking about a breakdown of society. The world had become a very dangerous place. Getting on in the world meant keeping others down. This violence went deep into who they are. Did you notice where it says that rather than being concerned with bearing the image of God, their thoughts and imagination was constantly evil? What was God's response? What was God's response to all of this evil? Well, it was that it broke his heart to see his world so polluted. And he found just one man who shared his grief. One man who walked with him, and that man was Noah. And by comparison to everybody else, Noah was righteous. And so he chose Noah to do something about it. And when we think of the violence in our own society, the violence even with our own hearts, does it cause us to grieve? If so, we've got a heart like Noah. Our hearts are in tune with God's heart. God is unable to let this imbalance continue. The judgment of God is a fearful thing. But a loving God, that if you've got a God of love, it's a necessity. Letting everything go, just letting it carry on, would be the action of an indifferent God, an unloving God. A loving God had to bring it to a merciful end. I can't answer why he left it so long. That's where my paper hate, as it were. But God didn't create human beings with God created human beings with the ability to love. First, to respond to him, whose very nature is love, but also then to love each other. Love God, love your neighbour. And here's the problem. Love requires us to, at some level, decide to love. And in the universe God created, we can love God and love our neighbour as ourselves. But when we decide not to love God, we start to put ourselves in that spot, in the spot of God's, and love neighbour, and then love neighbour less than ourselves. At some point, God's going to call time on this. He will judge, and if he didn't, he wouldn't be God. So what's the solution? God's salvation. In the judgment that God describes, creation unwinds. The waters which were separated on day 3 will once again cover the earth. God's power in creating order out of chaos is reversed in judgment. But in the midst of this, Noah is saved. Notice Noah isn't whisked away to a heavenly cloud. Given the climatic conditions, that's probably quite a risky place to be. But he's not sort of taken out of it. He's given a plan for a boat. And Noah quite literally worked out his salvation in wood and pitch. It's almost as if humans are given him a second chance to look after God's creation. When God brings them out of the ark, it is a beautiful picture of God restoring what is lost. It came out 2 by 2. God created the animals, male and female, to populate the earth, and it happens again as they come out of the ark. If you ever think the Christian life is one of bliss, think again. You've only got to think how frightening the experience was for Noah to realise that. Later, biblical writers reflecting on this story underline that Noah did not have it easy. The years he spent building the ark, the years he spent being ridiculed and mocked, and then actually going into the ark as sort of the rain clouds gathered. And it must have been dark when God closed the ark. The sound of the animals all sort of anxious and worried and whatever. It would have been a truly frightening experience. But then we have Noah coming out, and he makes a sacrifice. Noah is celebrated as living a life of faith, walking with God when everyone else is going in the opposite direction. As he comes out of the ark, he demonstrates this faith once again. What could have been his lunch was put on the altar. God in his grace responded with a promise and signed it with a rainbow. God doesn't give up on sinful humanity. He doubled down on his commitment to love us and to bring us to be more like himself. And we celebrate that promise today. You notice the line that says seed time or time for planting and the time for harvest. And I guess that ties this story with our harvesting as well this morning. The great thing is that in doing and celebrating harvest this morning, we can be part of God's plan to deal with injustice and restore his very good creation. And it's a great privilege, isn't it, for us to be able to support the food bank in this way. So in closing, I imagine Noah giving his testimony in heaven. Maybe that won't be a thing we do in heaven, but maybe if it was, he may describe how God responded to his broken heart. The years he walked with God in humble obedience, taking in a neighbour or a stranger hurt by violence around him, the bitter disappointment when that stranger turned on him. All along, he would testify to the goodness of God, talk of his walk with God, the challenge of building an ark, the darkness when God closed the door, the terror of God's judgment, the joy of his salvation, and the joy when the door was opened. But what about our testimony? What could be our testimony? We perhaps too would testify to a broken heart. A heart that realised that there wasn't just violence outside, but there was violence inside. There wasn't sin outside in the world, but there was sin inside. And we would identify that God's heart was broken over the sin of humankind. This time, we would look back to when the skies turned dark and Jesus hung on a cross and dealt with the injustice of his blood of creation, that restored the balance that needed to be there. Jesus, who was righteous by definition, not by comparison, was hung on a cross so that we could become righteous by association. We could be righteous by taking on his righteousness. This time, the carpentry, as I said, was a cross. The darkness was the tomb. This time, God the Father opened, and instead of a rainbow, Jesus stepped out, the risen Lord. The question is, do you dare to trust this Saviour? Do you dare to rely on his work?